Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. This is Todd with Industrial Comfort. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a bulb length cutting jig, or for smaller projects, just a regular circle cutting jig. Now, for a wood turner like myself that likes to make bowls, cutting blanks like this is a total chore. So to have a jig that allows me to do this consistently and with ease every time is literally a game changer. So for short money, I'm going to show you how to do this with an adjustable jig that gets you perfect results every time. Let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is prep the saw for the jig. So I'm going to remove the fence and I'm going to take the blade off, at which point we'll then be able to move on to the base of the jig. Okay, with the saw cleared, I now have what's going to serve as the base of the jig. Now, this is a 24-inch by 36-inch long piece of plywood that's going to serve as the base of this jig. Now, the size will vary based on the size of your saw and the available workspace that you have. Now, the size of this wood will also be mitigated by the circles or the bulb lengths that you want to cut. Now, for me and my lathe, I can't go any larger than a 20-inch swing. So for me, I want to have at least 10 inches from the pivot that I'm going to put into the track and the saw blade. Now, I've extended the deck about 12 inches beyond the saw blade in order to just put some clamps in place. But for this application, a 24 by 36 inch piece of wood is going to work. Now for the next step, I'm going to glue and tack a piece of wood here that's going to act as a stop against this, this fence guide here. And then I'm going to put a miter track in place so that I have stability not only on this axis, but also on this axis. And then we'll go ahead and work with the, we'll put a channel in place here that will serve as the guide depending on the size circle or bulb length that we want to cut. Now, I mentioned in the previous step for the base of the jig I was going to put a stop on the very edge. So I've got just an extra piece of oak here, and this happens to be 3/4 of an inch by 1.5 inches and roughly about 30 inches long. The length doesn't really matter. You can go as long as you want. I just want to get enough surface contact that we're covering the base of the saw. So I'm going to glue this in place and then I'll tack it and then we'll move on to the next step. And for this, I'm using an 18 gauge nailer. You can use drills or you don't have to do anything. You can just glue it and be done with it. In an earlier step, I mentioned that I wanted to take advantage of the miter track here in order to prevent stability laterally this way. So what I've done is take an extra piece of oak that I've had laying around, similar to the stop that we created in the last step, and I've created a little miter bar to fit in this track here. Now these are all pretty much standard sizes. Now it's a little bit, just a hair shallower than the edge of this deck here. So what I'm going to do is put a few washers in place that will raise it ever so slightly so that I can make contact with the deck of the jig without interfering with the table here. So I'm just going to back the edge out here because the stop is going to prevent this bar from going any further. So I'm just going to knock it out a little bit. When I put the bar in and move it forward, it'll align itself. Now, I'm going to use a combination of CA glue and regular glue. The CA glue will help us make contact right away, and then we'll let the regular glue sit overnight. Okay, I'm going to apply some accelerator to the base, and then we'll lay everything on top. And that should do it. Yep. And there we go. So now we'll let this set up overnight and we'll finish the rest tomorrow. I've got the saw reassembled and the blade back on. So the glue has now had time to set. So I'm going to put the jig with the miter track lined up. And I'm going to turn the saw on and we're going to cut until this panel, or the base of the jig, reaches the edge of the saw based on the stop that we put in yesterday. And that's going to allow us to measure where our T-track is going to come in. That's going to help us with the adjustment based on the size circle or bulb length that we're going to make. Okay, now that this has stopped moving, we have a location where we're going to measure out the T-track. So what I'm going to do is get a speed square, and I'm going to get the T-track that we're going to use, which I've moved the location of the camera so that we can get a better view. Now, I'm going to use the location of the blade here to mark out where we're going to cut a channel for this T-track. Now, the beauty of this track is that the slide here on the interior track actually has a line right down the center. So we're going to use a speed square. We're going to line everything up until this center line matches the inside of the gullet here. And that's going to be where we're going to place this track. All right. So now I'm going to just mark the location. Okay, so this is where we're going to cut the channel to eventually nest this track. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to show you how to make a jig for the router so that we can precisely cut the channel out for this T-track. I'm not sure how well you can see the lines here, but essentially this is the channel that we're going to route out so that we can fit this T-track. And so we just have to make sure that we have the right depth stop on this, and we'll use the template, and essentially we're just going to line up the edge of this slot here with the edge of the line. I'm going to use some double-sided tape to line this up, and then we'll give it a go. All right, with the channel cut, it's now time to put the T-track in place. Now, this is a T-track that I got at Home Depot. You can get these on Amazon or really anywhere. It's 36 inches in length, and I actually ended up buying a 48-inch and cutting it down, as you can see here. But nonetheless, what I'm going to do is glue this in place. But before I do that, I'm going to give the top here just a very light sand. I also want to just sand the edges, make sure everything is smooth. And then because we're going to see a lot of friction on the top of this board, I'm going to give it a quick wax. Now, in order to ensure that this has a nice, a good fit from an adhesive point of view, I'm just going to scuff up kind of the sides and bottom of this with some sandpaper before I glue it in place. Okay, I'm going to lay a bead of wood glue. This is Tight Bond number 3 in the track here. A good scuffing. I've got some 80 grit sandpaper. Okay, now we're going to let this set up overnight, and in the meantime, we're going to start drilling out the sliding miter track here. And the reason that we're going to do that is for 2 reasons. Number one is we're going to install a standoff pin, and this is actually going to serve as the rotational axis for the wood that we're going to use to cut the circle from. Secondly, I've got a thumb screw, and we're going to put a series of threaded holes in this track so that we can effectively lock it in place depending on the size circle we're looking to make. So we'll mark out the track here and get drilling. Now the really cool thing about this sliding miter track is it has a nice indentation right down the center. So for the rotational pin, I'm going to mark it out at an inch. So this is where I'm going to put the standoff. Then I'm going to mark a series of additional locations for the thumb screw to accommodate, I want to be able to lock the track in place as close to the axis pin as possible. So I'll probably start one at, or I'll put another one in at, I'll do 12 inches. Now, I'll probably, for the second one, go 16. I'll probably just go in 4-inch increments. Now the thumb screws, or the thumb screw and the standoff are all threaded at 1/4 inch by 20 thread count. So I'm just gonna use my tap here to thread all these holes. I've got all the holes drilled and tapped now in this sliding miter bar. Now you'll notice up here I've got 2 holes. I accidentally cross-threaded the first one, so I drilled a second one. Now depending on your application, you might want to use thinner bolts. Now for me, I'm going to be turning bowls, so I wanted to be able to cut circular bowl blanks. If you're going to be cutting really small stock, you might want to use something a lot smaller. Now the beauty of going with a threaded solution like this is that you can use whatever size bolts you want depending on your application. So if I'm going to cut a bowl blank, I use a much bigger screw as opposed to something a little bit smaller that I'm going to show you in the test that we're going to do with a piece of plywood. Now, the other thing that I've done is bought one of these thumb screws. Now this is, as I mentioned before, going to allow us to create a positive stop on this jig based on the size circle we're going to cut. So I'm going to put everything together and then we'll go ahead and give it a test. Now, one quick thing that I do want to mention. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that I was going to be using a standoff pin or a standoff screw. You'll notice that I changed the approach and just used a standard 14 by 20 thread count screw. The reason I did that is because threaded spacers or standoffs are really difficult to get in standard measurement. They're readily available for metric sizes, but I didn't really want to go that route. So I ended up changing the plan and just using screws, which is going to be perfectly fine. All right, it's time to give this jig a test run. So I'm going to cut a 9-inch circle from this piece of plywood. So the first thing that I've done is drill a hole at a 1/4 inch wide, which corresponds with the 1/4 inch bolt that we threaded through the underside of this miter bar. I've gone 3/8 of an inch deep, which is half the thickness of this piece of plywood. In order to get a 9-inch circle, I'm going to measure 4.5 inches from the edge of the blade to the center of the bolt. And then I'm going to use the thumb screw to sort of lock everything down. Next thing I'm going to do is pull the jig forward, and the hardest part of this project is going to be lining the hole up with the bolt. Well, I guess it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Now I'm going to turn the saw on, and what I'm going to do is push this jig forward, and then I'm going to rotate it, and that's going to allow us to cut this circle. Let's give it a shot. Now, I'm going to undo the stop here, and I'm going to push the miter bar back, and I'm just going to, take the piece off. Look at that. Look at how awesome that was. So, let's now put in an inch bolt, and let's give it a shot with a bowl blank. I'm going to go with the same procedure as before. You'll notice that we've got an 1.25 inch long bolt in here as opposed to the 1/2 inch that we had before. I'm also going to move my set screw back. I'm going to go with a 12-inch blank based on the size of the wood that I've got, which means that I'm going to measure 6 inches. Wow, that was actually pretty much on the money. So 6 inches from the center of the post to the edge of the blade. I'm going to tighten the screw down. And then I am going to pull the jig back so that I can get the piece of wood on here, and I'm just going to clamp things in place to help stabilize everything. I'm going to grab this piece of cherry, and I'm now going to remove the clamp, and we're going to slide this forward. We're going to turn the saw on, and we'll spin it around and create our blank. Look at that. A perfect bowl blank. That is awesome. I am really happy with the way this came out, and for a bowl turner like myself, a jig like this is going to prove to be invaluable for cutting large bowl blanks like these. If you found this helpful, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching.